chair this this session this afternoon. I'm particularly delighted that we're joined by an esteemed panel of speakers, and I'll just set out for you how I intend to that we proceed with the debate. We'll first have introductions from each of the speakers for just introducing themselves, and following that, then I'll go around the speakers again for a 3-minute input on the topic. After that, after we've heard each of the speakers, I will then invite comments and questions from the audience. You just raise your hand to indicate you wish to speak, and just wait till you're call upon. I would appreciate maybe if you would give your name at the beginning, and that would be much appreciated. So we'll kick the session off with the first speaker to introduce themselves, Professor Brian Caulfield.
So good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for attending. My name is Brian Caulfield. I'm a professor in transportation at Trinity College in Dublin.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Aisling Dunne. Aisling.
Many thanks, Cathaoirleach. Yeah, my name is Aisling Dunne. I'm Head of Public Policy for Bolt Micromobility Operator here in Ireland.
Thanks, Aisling. And our third speaker, Léan Doody.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Léan Doody. I'm the Director of Cities and Planning at Arup, which is a multinational or multi-country international consultancy focusing on engineering and design.
Thanks, Léan. And finally, Philip Jackson.
Hello, I'm Philip Jackson. I'm a project director with Scott Tallon Walker Architects here in Dublin. I lead our urban planning and urban design division. I'm also a director of the Academy of Urbanism. So I do a lot of work around Europe and looking at cities and giving awards, etc. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's great to see a diversity of backgrounds and experience from our panelists, and hopefully this will enrich the conversation later on. I will now ask each of the panelists to give a 3-minute opening statement on the topic, the future of public space and sustainable travel, key opportunities and challenges. So we will start with you, Brian, if you want to kick off.
Sure. Thank you. So to begin with, I would just like to recognise my colleague, Dr. Robert Egan. It's because of his work that I got the invite here today to talk to you. He's done some fantastic work on the public realm and cycling here in DLR, and we publicise the work quite broadly, and I'm sure he will be able to take questions better than I can on it. So in terms of public space and public reallocation, one of the things that I've tried to start to do is not to talk about roads, which is difficult when you teach road engineering and traffic engineering at a university, but to talk to it more about the public realm. And this is public space. It's the space that we all inhabit. And how we kind of police that space, how we allocate that space should be based upon need, and it should be based upon more so the environmental need. We've got a world-class example just right outside our door here in DLR, and it's an example that I've spoken about and I've seen spoken about internationally. But if you look internationally, what other cities and public realms are doing is giving over the space, taking the space away from the private car and giving it back to people. Because at the end of the day, in our cities and our towns and our urban areas, that's where people tend to be. You can see it in big cities, you can see it in Barcelona, you can see it in Paris, but you can see it even more in smaller towns and villages and cities right across Europe. The other thing that is driving this change is obviously the climate change crisis that we're all experiencing. This week I left a lecture at 6 o'clock in Trinity, and it was 21 degrees. The next day I went in to give the second part of that lecture, left, and it was 5 degrees. So, our climate is changing and we need to do something about transport and transport emissions. About 2 years ago now, the OECD came to town and they did a big review for us here in transport. And they looked at all of the things that we're currently doing. And if you look at the current climate action plan, the majority of it is sell 1 million electric cars. And that is a reactionary policy. What the OECD have told us, and they're based upon international best practice and best evidence, is that the reallocation of space is one of the key things that we need to do in order to be able to meet our climate change and our climate targets. So what's happened here in DLR is an exemplar for the rest of the country, and it is one that we're hoping, and I hope at least, is about to be mimicked in Dublin City. And if you've seen the Dublin City document on the Pathfinder, one of the most astonishing facts in that report is that 60% of the traffic that is in Dublin city centre is going through Dublin city centre. Only 40% is stopping in Dublin city centre. So if we want our urban spaces to be there for through traffic, and obviously people need to get around, and there's, you know, accessibility needs, etc., that is very important. But what this traffic brings with it is air quality problems, and we see that in Dublin City. Our standards in terms that we monitor are linked to the EPA, and we meet those standards most of the time, but we never meet the standards that the World Health Organization has set out in terms of particulate matter, and that's the dust that causes asthma, and the carcinogenics that come from diesel and petrol cars. We never meet those targets. So by providing more space for people, families, to move around, and adding in more green space, and to finish, green space is vital in our urban areas, because we've just, okay, this summer wasn't a great summer, but it will probably be the coldest summer anybody in this room will ever experience. Our summer's only going to get warmer. We need more green space. We need more trees that create canopies that block heat and cool our cities. And I'll leave you with that.
Thanks, Brian. That's an insight, interesting insight that you've covered for us. So we'll get straight into our second speaker, Aisling Dunne.
Very much, Cathaoirleach, and also thank you to Brian for that kind of overview of, I suppose, what we need to be doing. I'll be speaking today more so from a practical perspective, because as somebody who's working in the industry for a shared operator, I suppose we're looking at it from the perspective of how can we get more sustainable transport solutions out there? What are some of the biggest barriers to that? And how can we work together to help that modal shift? So I suppose when we're looking at sustainable transport, everyone in this room probably knows that we're talking about getting more people cycling and walking, getting more people using buses, trains and trams, sharing resources, so e-bikes and e-scooter sharing, car sharing, which is something that we need to be doing more of in Ireland, and then also electric cars and low emission vehicles. So the area that I work in is mostly on shared modes. And there are a number of factors that I suppose are necessary to support that shift towards those sustainable transport shared modes. So if you're talking about, you know, renting a bike, or in the future renting a scooter, there needs to be sufficient availability. You need to be sure that you can get access to that mode. They need to be reliable. You need to be sure that if they're there on a Monday and you decide to, you know, not buy a car or not own a car or get rid of it, you need to be sure that it will be available to you every day for the coming weeks, the coming months. So there needs to be reliability, and it needs to be affordable. If it is cheaper for somebody to take their car and park it outside their place of work, or drive directly to a place, pay for petrol and pay for parking, than it is for them to rent a bike or own a bike, then they're just not going to do it. So affordability is a really key criteria. But I suppose the most important criteria that we're seeing is space, making space for these kind of shared sustainable modes. And so when people talk about making space for, you know, shared cycling or cycling and e-bikes, you traditionally think of cycle lanes, infrastructure that we see being rolled out in Dún Laoghaire at an amazing pace, and a really quality example of what we need. But there is another element of this space requirement that probably doesn't feature in the discussion to the same extent, and that is around parking. So if you're going to have shared modes, which the OECD report has referenced as being one of a number of measures that we need to roll out in Ireland if we're going to get people away from private car ownership and private car use, they need to be compatible with all the other different uses that our cities and towns have. So they need to be compatible with other people walking. They can't be clogging up the pavements. They need to be compatible with other people cycling. They can't be clogging up the Sheffield stands, all the bike parking. So how do we make space for modes that can be shared and that can share the resources that we have, get people out of their cars without impacting on other people? So I suppose I'll mention the controversial e-scooters. I'm sure many people in this room have either seen the kind of street clutter caused by e-scooters in many cities around Europe and America, or else they've heard of it. But it's a serious problem, and it's one of, I think, the biggest obstacles to those kind of shared modes that we're facing here in Ireland as we look to them coming in the coming months. So free-floating models, certainly bad for the impact they have on all the other kind of road users, pedestrians. But tethered modes, having them at bike stands, can also be bad for other cyclists who then have difficulty parking. So trying to figure out how you apportion out the space in our public realm to make sure that you are encouraging all the different kind of sustainable transport options that are out there, making sure that we aren't creating barriers to the uptake of these new modes, is something that I think local government needs to be considering, national government needs to be considering, and as do operators. We need to be coming up with solutions for how we can share the space in a way that doesn't impact on other road users, but still provides that full range of options that we need to be doing to move towards sustainable transport. I think the same thing applies for car sharing. I mean, most private vehicles are left idle and parked 95% of the time. So most people who have a private car, we're obviously encouraging everyone to not be using it too often. But the downside of that, or the fact of that is that your cars are taking up space in cities and towns that could be used elsewhere. But if we move towards car sharing, they have those same principles of making them available, making them reliable, making them flexible. And one of the big issues we have here is that I suppose car sharing is still somewhat restrictive. We don't have enough of it. We need to see more. And I suppose these are the kind of things we need to think about, how we allocate space better for all of these shared modes. Thank you.
Thanks, Aisling. Interesting topic, cycle lanes and e-scooters, I'm sure generates and does generate quite an amount of conversation. We'll move on then and maybe hear your thoughts, Léan, on the topic.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, especially as a Dún Laoghaire resident myself. It's great to be part of this discussion. And I guess my sort of key point that I'm going to make is that good quality public space that's safe is really essential to enable people to be comfortable, walking, cycling, taking public transport, whether that's bus or train or tram or whatever. And I guess the other bit is that there is a very positive case for those things, that there are good reasons to use sustainable modes in the kind of transport planning language that are related to enjoyment and health and so on, not just about carbon emissions. And the way into this, I'm going to talk a bit about the study that we did for Transport Infrastructure Ireland, which was called Travelling in a Woman's Shoes. And that was one of the first studies of its kind, looking at how women use public transport. And we carried out the study, and the reason that Transport Infrastructure Ireland, the TII, commissioned the study was they want to understand. They know that they need to encourage more sustainable public transport, but also sort of equity issues around that. And they wanted to understand how women use public transport and the reason that they use cars more than public transport. So we did this in two ways. We first of all, we did a piece of research called ethnographic research, where we did sort of in-depth interviews with 20 women, and we took a small journey with them to see how they actually, all the different micro barriers, if you like, or challenges that they had. And then we did a study, a survey of 1,000 people, men and women, to kind of try and see how some of the issues that we would have uncovered in the interviews played out at a larger scale. And I guess the sort of key findings were really around, in terms of related to women's roles as carers. So in Ireland, as in many places, women are the sort of main carers. Obviously there are men who do that as well, and increasingly so. And so those findings would also apply to men when they are being carers. And also issues of safety. So in particular, the challenges, societal challenges women face around safety. And I guess in terms of those, I'm going to focus on the findings related to public space. In terms of caring, women tend to have more complicated journeys. So trip chaining, so the 90-minute fare that has been rolled out is directly relevant to that. But in terms of public space, making it easy and safe to access public space. So not forgetting about the routes to the bus or to the train, making safe and pleasant routes to those places which are close to where people live. So people don't have long, boring and frightening, which is the worst combination. So you're bored and you're frightened on your way to the bus or the train station. Secondly, people need safe and comfortable places to wait. So they need places, somewhere to sit down. This applies also to elderly people, to children as well. Places, somewhere to sit, somewhere with a toilet that's accessible, somewhere that's well lit, and somewhere where there's plenty of people so that there's passive surveillance, so people feel safe. CCTV cameras on their own are not enough to make people feel safe. And then I guess a third finding was around child-friendly, so child-friendly spaces so that children can be independent. As we all know, when children go back to school, the amount of traffic on the road increases massively. It would be much better for those kids to be able to go to school on their own. And I think that would be, for both parents and children. So having those kind of child-friendly places. And then finally, making the positive case for public transport. So, a lot of people in our studies talked about enjoying public transport, finding it less stressful than driving. And certainly, as any of us who take the Dart in, we've got a fantastic 15-minute look at the sea for our journey, which is incredibly enjoyable. So I think, again, we just need to not lose sight that this can be a positive and enjoyable thing that enriches people's lives, and focus on that. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Léan. My apologies, I had my mic off. We'll now move to our final speaker, Philip Jackson.
Okay, thank you. I don't really know how I'm going to follow up too well. From the interesting points that have already been made, my focus is very much about places for people, rather than sustainable transport. I really think that when I think about people and places, it's about how we as a society function and work together as a community. How we go about our everyday business and activities, and are there ways of making it easier and more sustainable. And the easiest way to do that is to think local. The many ways that as architects and planners, we have to think about the human scale, and that people should be able to walk to work rather than have to get a train to work, if possible. Now, society, the way we've organised our cities isn't like that at the moment, but we saw during the pandemic that suddenly people were working from home, and it was in fact very nice to do. And since then, society has actually shifted in the way that we work with people working from home some of the week, meeting colleagues in the office on other days of the week. So this kind of shift has started taking place. A key point really where I come from in many ways, I was taught by Jan Gale, the famous Danish urbanist, and he always said first life, then the spaces, and then buildings. So as an architect, I was being trained to design buildings. He actually said, no, you start off by thinking about life, and life is about people, and it's about how we use space. And really, people are social beings. We like to gather and talk with each other. We enjoy human contact and watching other people. We enjoy sitting in the sun, breathing fresh air, a nice breeze, the rustle of leaves, the sound of waves. These are all good for our health and well-being, mentally and physically. And we don't like having to shout over traffic noise and fumes or having to look around all the time for traffic. So it's about this sense of well-being, sense of safety. Another Yangel quote is, a good city is like a good party. People stay longer because they're really enjoying themselves. So it's about the stay time. If you're creating a really nice public space, people will want to use it, people will want to gather, and that will bring more people and more interaction. And this is actually about social well-being and building up a community as well. So the way I think about how we design neighbourhoods and residential and town centres is really thinking about these kind of principles. Jane Jacobs, a very eminent urbanist, said, a well-used street is apt to be a safe street. A deserted street is apt to be unsafe. So as Léan was saying, it's about if you're walking along a street, you want to see other people using that street and using it properly and contributing rather than being antisocial. And that requires passive surveillance that they'll be seen and held to account. He is a walkable, inclusive community, social cohesion where families can live close to each other. Walkable neighbourhoods mean that most everyday needs should be within a 15 to 20-minute walk of where you live, including work, school, college. And at a stretch, it can be 30 minutes, but you know that's okay. But when I lived in London, people were commuting over 2 hours a day in either direction, and it just was unsustainable. Neighbourhoods need to be really well connected with each other, and they need to be provided with really good quality places and spaces, places to sit and chat, spaces to play, green space, planting, and proximity to nature. So Dunleary does this really well. It's done amazing work over the past 5 years. And as a resident of Dunleary, I really appreciated during the pandemic. I was always in town working, and suddenly I was stuck in Dunleary, and I realised what a great place it is. So it's very much that's because it's actually doing this work, and in doing so, it's creating social value through improving the public realm. That's attracting people, it's building up the economy, but it's also building up and improving people's quality of life. And that's really one of the reasons why Dunleary was awarded the Academy of Urbanism Great Town of the Year award in 2022. I've been with the Academy of Urbanism. I've been visiting. I've been lead assessor, not for the towns, but for the cities. So last year I visited Trieste, which it's very interesting coming from Dunleary to Trieste. It's like Dunleary on a big scale with big buildings. It's a city. but it's a coastal city. It has associations with James Joyce. It's it's a city of literature. And it was awarded the European City of the Year last year, alongside Dunleary as Great Town. Over the past 20 years, Trieste has been reorganizing its traffic, improving public transport, using smart technology so that people can actually dial a bus, and the bus will stop outside people's house if it's on the route or at the nearest stop. And they'll put on an extra bus if lots of people are ringing up saying we need to get the bus to the hospital today, for example. Public spaces are used now, instead of being car dominated, they're used for exhibitions, festivals, concerts, lots of outdoor activities, markets, sporting events. When I was there in the morning, there was a street that in the morning had a market and books on secondhand book sales and things like that. And in the evening, it was full of restaurants and people seating. There's another place I went to, and they were having outdoor discos. The cafes just had all the discos outside because it was a nice warm time of year. And it was just really how they had reinvented how they use the public realm to be multi-layered, so that it can be used in different ways throughout the day, into the night, and yet in the morning it was all cleaned up. People were out having, where the disco was the night before, it was all clean, people were out having breakfast. Utrecht is another city that I've visited. It didn't win the award the previous year. But it's really incredible because they used to have a dual carriageway going through the city centre. It replaced an old canal, and it was next to the railway station. And they have now replaced that dual carriageway with a canal. And they now have boats going along, and it's right in the city centre. And alongside it, next to the railway station, they have a huge parking garage for bicycles, so that everybody cycles into town. There's a traffic jam of cyclists because it's the Netherlands, and they all get on the train, but they leave their bikes in the garage. There are 2 garages, and there's about 25,000 bicycles. And people go off to other places, and when they come back and they pick up their bicycle and go off again. But both of these places have really been looking at mobility in an intelligent way, and the shift that's happening now and that we're taking on board is when we're designing places, we're no longer thinking about providing car parking, but we're looking at providing mobility hubs. So if we're creating a new housing area or a new neighbourhood, we're thinking that there should be a mobility hub about a 5-minute walk next to the local shop where you can buy a pint of milk or your newspaper. And at a mobility hub, you pick up your e-bike or your e-car or whichever one you need that day. And this is shared for your local neighbourhood. And off you go for the day, and you're using all of this. You bring it back because it belongs to your neighbourhood. And maybe the next day you're working from home, you're doing your activities from home. So that is the way thinking is progressing. I was in Cambridge earlier this year, and there's going to be, they're looking at doing this in a new neighbourhood in northeast Cambridge. It's a bit like Cherrywood. It would be the scale of it, but it's split into different neighbourhoods, and each neighbourhood has its own mobility hub, and it takes 5 minutes to walk to the local railway station as well. They've built the new railway station, and it's envisaged as being a mixed neighbourhood. It's not just residential, it's also a place where people will be working. There's already offices and things there. So it's trying to mix things up and make things a lot more flexible. So instead of having a residential area, a work area, having separate land uses, it's real, and it's actually bringing different uses even into the same building and making things much more flexible. And when we look at our traditional towns and how they've worked, that's how they worked historically. So in many ways, we're not introducing a lot of new ways of living and working. We're just revisiting the way it was done 100 years ago and picking up that thinking again and taking it forward. So I know I've gone well over time.
Thanks, Philip. And thank you all for your insight into the topic. Now we come to the best part. I love this part because we'll put a bit of pressure on the speakers, I hope. And I know from looking around the room and the attention you gave to the speakers that there's a genuine an interest, a wealth of experience and knowledge, I have no doubt. So I'm going to open up the floor for comment or questions to our panel. If you wish to speak, just raise your hand. I'll be able to pick you up. And you just press the red button in front of you. You'll see it there on the mic. And when you finish speaking, just turn it off because the next speaker won't be able to speak unless your speaker is off. So there's a gentleman over on the far side there who has a question.
How do we get that done ideally decade, and what would you identify as the three biggest obstacles?
Thank you very much. I'll just take two more speakers, Brian, if you don't mind, give you a chance to gather your thoughts. Anybody else who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Gentleman over here. You might give your name when you speak. Yeah, press the button. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. My name is Stefano, and I'm the owner, founder, director of Green Bikes, a local business based in Dunleary County Council. And obviously, I'm thanks a lot for your insights, so very valuable. And obviously, I'm talking from the point of view of a local stakeholder who's trying to understand the multidimensional problems in embracing new concepts. And I understand that the new sustainable way is to, find obviously ways to changing mindsets, and obviously based on the demographics, location. Obviously, there's also elements there to analyze when you're planning ahead towards a sustainable future of transport. On top of that, I would like to just want to add on my idea, which is basically as a local stakeholder, I'm interested in bringing new technology, new infrastructure, and I would love to see, obviously, taking stock of what Philip just outlined, in comparison to other European cities, that there's a lot of good technology out there to be embraced. And I can mention places like Zurich or Geneva, which have seen incredible, public transport being, taking a charge while they ride passengers at the bus stop. So the technology is there. It's just to advance in trying to embrace. And as I said, as a local supplier, I be bringing in new technology. Hopefully, I cooperated with the local enterprise office here, Sandyford Business District, and allowed to see, obviously, new concept be taken into the frame.
Okay, we've got the point, and we might give that to Aisling later. I'll take one more question in this session. Any further? Gentleman down.
how can we have any of the things that you guys have talked about when we have a police force who don't investigate bicycle thefts at all and who don't enforce road traffic at all, when we have the technology like cameras, etc., to make our roads safer and to enforce good behavior, but we refuse to use it?
Okay, I've no doubt that the Gardaí do investigate by theft and all forms of theft. So Brian, I'll go back to you for.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I can hear the frustration in your voice. I share that frustration. And actually, at the end of a lecture during the week, I was talking about the Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy and how I was involved in it. And the student came up to me and asked me, do you not get massively frustrated all of the time? So yes, there's massive frustration. I'm not, and I think the NTA are quite frustrated too. I think the NTA, if they could do everything they wanted to do and had free rein to do it, they would be doing it. The Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy, I was one of the expert advisors on it. It has a lot of light rail in it. I'm not sure. I'd like to talk to you one-on-one about the shopping part of it, but the strategy is very good. It uses the best science. It uses the best demographics that we have to put out a strategy. But the frustration is real, and I'll give you an example of something that frustrates me. It's in a different local authority. It's in Fingal. It's the extension of the Finglas line. And if you look at that website, it's going to take 10 years to build 4 kilometers. We don't have 10 years anymore to build anything. We need to be doing this at breakneck speed. We need to build about 60 years of public transport infrastructure in a 10-15 years, and it's because our elected representatives have let us down and they haven't invested in public transport for decades, even a century in this country. And I'm not sure I can add to any of the other ones. The technology one, I'm a person that believes in, you know, a technology readiness level of 8 or 10 if possible, because I don't think technology is going to save us. We don't have the time to wait to see if autonomous cars and all of these other things and sensors will save us. I just don't believe in it.
Thanks, Brian. Aisling, do you want to deal with the second one?
Yeah, Stefano, I think you mentioned you work with oh, sorry. My apologies. Stefano from Green Bikes. I suppose I would agree with what you've said around the potential opportunities for technology, while also agreeing with Brian that, you know, we can't wait for things that are, you know, 10, 15 years away. We need to take what's available now, but I also think we need to support any technologies that are looming or possible and see what can work. I think I spoke to somebody in the Department of Transport recently, and they said this isn't a case of, you know, focusing on one solution. It isn't that mass is going to solve everything. It isn't that e-bikes are going to solve everything. Electric cars aren't going to be the solution. We need to be doing everything. We need to try everything. Such is the challenge that we're facing. So I think technology has certainly a role to play, and some of the solutions around electric bikes are part of it, and electrification.
Thanks, Aisling. And do you want to take the gentleman's one on the bicycles, or Léan?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess enforcement is a very core part of this, and I think, you know, in terms of the report that I was talking about earlier, having clear reporting mechanisms, having transparency around, you know, if you report something, what happens to that? Where are the figures? Where is the kind of service journey, if you like, of that complaint or that report? And then having transparency around what happens would give people more confidence that, you know, they're that, you know, bikes or other theft, other crime is being dealt with, or other complaints. So in the case of the work that I was talking about, you know, harassment, antisocial behaviour, all those things, and having enforcement and having transparency is really important.
Thanks, Léan. Lady over here.
Thank you. My name is Hannah, and I'm curious how many people who are here are using public transport every day. Please, can you raise your hands? Okay, I'm using it every day. And I want to say that there are things that definitely can be changed, and it will not take a lot of resources. For example, each weekend I would like to come to Dunleary, but my bus is not coming, not appearing, cancelled, or went off. No one saw it, but it is out of schedule, and it shows, okay, it was here, but no one saw it. When I came here to Ireland 5 years ago, my neighbors asked me if I have a car, if I can drive. I said, no, I hope I will be using public transport. And they looked at me as if I'm absolutely crazy person. And now I know why. Because I'm handicapped without public transport. Luas line, it is very great. I like it very much. But each bank holiday this year, it wasn't working at all. And I stayed at home. I was trapped at home because of no other ways to go anywhere without a car. Each time I wanted to take my son, he was 9, I wanted to take him to Lochlinstown swimming pool, and the weather was harsh and raining. The bus didn't appear, and I needed to run with my small son for 20 minutes to that swimming pool. After a few months, I gave up. And until now, for 2 years, he's not going to swimming pool because I don't have a car. Now I'm learning to drive. It took me almost 2.5 years, and still I didn't have my driving license, but definitely something could be done. I had been sending messages, I had been writing to transport companies for 6 times, and I received a 0 reply. 0. For 5 years, I'm writing, I'm sending messages, and I got 0 reply. Each time there is a windy weather, next day was not working, and no substitute buses. It is a disaster, a total disaster. And now I understand why my neighbors looked at me and decided that I'm absolutely crazy person. But
Okay. Thanks, Anna.
definitely, it is not so difficult to deal with such problem.
Thank you. You've made
Thank
your point well. Gentleman at the back. Thank you, Chris. We got a number of questions in from people who booked, and it might be timely if Michael Noonan is in the audience. No, I'll ask his question for him if he's not in the audience. Is there any sustainable way to fly? So that dovetails into the 2 previous speakers. So over to you, the panel.
I'd like to respond to Hannah and say that it's an indictment of the public transport that we provide in this city that you are now taking driving lessons, and it's not something I like to hear. I would also say that if maybe you're lucky that you're in Dublin, because if you were in rural Ireland, those trips are much more difficult, and to try and do what you're doing is very difficult. Is there a sustainable way to fly now?
We pass that on to Michael. Who wants to take Chris's?
Yeah, just in terms of what Chris was saying, I would entirely agree with him. I remember when I lived around Grand Canal Dock when I first came to Dublin, and they had opened the station, and I was really looking forward to it, but I actually lived on the wrong side of the station, away from the entrance, and had to walk 15 minutes to get to it. And I thought, it is really poor. People were delighted that they actually, in Laoghaire-Rathdown, actually built a station, but this is an issue that applies on many of our dot lines and stations, and we're trying to open them up and look at ways that they should have 2 or 3 entrances. The way that the ticketing, the way that they're managed has changed, because it's now much more automated, and it's much easier that they can have several entrances in. So on that side, I also would like to just respond to Hannah as well. I think it really is a poor indictment on our public transport service. In most places in Europe that I visited and lived in, using public transport is the norm, because it's a good, reliable, regular service. The example of Zurich was given. They've had a tram system for years and years that has been developed, and people go about it. They don't even dream or think about having a car. The normality is that there's going to be a tram there in a few minutes. It's a different kind of tram system to here. We have buses, but buses, as you say, but there's no certainty. And even coming here today, I took a bus, and I was actually getting a bit stressed.
Okay, Léan, you wanted to add?
Yeah, just to Hannah's point, I think that the problem is that policymakers assume that everyone can drive and that everyone is a motorist. And actually, in our study, we found that 20% of women either don't drive, don't have access to a car, or don't have a license. And I actually I don't drive either. I don't have a license. And like you, I am now taking driving lessons because I'm back in Dublin 6 years. I'm lucky that my children were small and we lived in London, and it was possible to take them to the swimming pool and all that using public transport, because I didn't drive. So I can feel that you're angry, and I feel angry as well. And part of that study was to as I mentioned, it was the first study of its type, and this falls disproportionately upon women, because women are the ones who are bringing the children to the swimming pool and bringing the kids to the shops and bringing the kids to the school and doing those complicated journeys, which are impossible, as you have said, using public transport, which is why, more women drive. And it is not right. And so it has to be about, we cannot let this discussion become dominated by the needs of motorists, because it is not fair. And so policymakers and politicians who promote driving as the only way of getting around, that is not right, and we can't let that happen. So we have to do something about it.
Thanks, Léan. Yeah, Hannah, very quick.
Thank you very much. I highly appreciate everything you said, and I feel it is all you said is also my dream, that people will live in such areas where they will be able to reach all they need, their local shop, their medical center, swimming pool, some other activities for people of different ages within walking distance, 15-20 minutes. And also, I am very grateful that you mentioned that research about women's needs regarding their travels, and also that you said about that problems. And I hope that we will be heard and things will be changing, because really it is very, very big problem for
Thanks,
us.
Hannah. If you wanted to speak to me separately afterwards in relation to specific routes, I'll be available to do that if you would like to. Can I
Thank
just
you.
be cheeky at this stage and do an add-on, I suppose? In your opinion, what more can the national or local governments be doing to support the transition to sustainable transport? If you
I might just jump in here. I suppose the national government in recent years, I think, there has been a significant increase in funding made available for cycling and walking routes, 360 million again in budget 2024, just announced this week. So, nearly 1 million a day on cycling and walking infrastructure is significant. I think nearly councils are struggling to spend that money, and the NTA is struggling to nearly get that money out because of other objections. But the funding is there at the moment. I think from the shared sustainable transport modes, I think a lot of the councils are lacking in guidance from the national government. So when I speak to councils, they say, we're not sure how this should work. Is it a license? Do we subsidize you? Do you pay us? How does it work? How do we make this an attractive solution for our citizens without impacting on other road users or public space users? So I think there is a need for a lot more guidance for councils from national government on how those kind of sustainable transport solutions, which are being introduced at a council level, but probably need more guidance from a national level.
Thanks, Ashley. Do we have a Sydney Nolan who sent in another question to us when he was booking? Have a Sydney Nolan? No. Sydney's question was, what other comparable cities should Dublin be looking to for planning inspiration? Now, I'm sure there are plenty of experts in the audience who'd like to make a comment at this stage, and I'll invite you again. Any experts who would hold on a moment. I'll let you in now. Anybody else who hasn't spoken before who would like to make a comment? Or gentleman over here.
Thanks. Owen Hearn from Codema, Dublin's energy agency. I just have a general comment around, I suppose there's been a huge amount of progress made in the last number of years in terms of public transport and active travel and all of that public realm kind of change. I'm just looking across the water to the UK and seeing a lot of pushback on sort of talk there of, war on motorists and, low traffic neighborhoods being kind of, I suppose, conspiracy theories nearly around, people being locked into their 15-minute neighborhoods and so on. I'm just wondering, is there a concern that we might be going down the same route here and that it might kind of bring a halt to some of the progress or at least slow things, and particularly when we had, a Green Minister for Transport for the last 3.5 years, and, what might happen if there's a change of government and, are we worried, basically? Thanks.
Thanks very much for that. If anybody who hasn't spoken before, gentleman over here, I'll come back to you. Just hit the button, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Ken O'Connor. Just a general question in terms of, and it's to follow on this gentleman's point, the auto industry is essentially sold as a pup. There's a quotation that I particularly enjoy, I don't know who made it, that says that cycling provides the freedom that the auto industry promises. So we're inundated, everybody's inundated every day. Like the people here actually want active travel, cycle networks and the like, but the general public is inundated and flooded with messages that then support the idea that motorists have rights, and what we're seeing in the UK with Richie Sunak's comments are pretty scary. Is there anything or what can be done in terms of public information campaigns or otherwise to actually counter the false advertising that the car industry gives us, with Skoda showing pictures of people up on Patrick with a car or in Glendalough. So is there any, like, could they be taken for false advertising?
Thank you. Okay, and that's 3. We'll take those first.
Just to respond to how do we combat the motor industry? And you're right, we have been sold a pup, but there's a reason why, you know, the population density in Ireland is about 72 people per square kilometre, and that's less than half of the European average is about 186. So we're locked into this car ownership. We've been baked into it by building motorways and spending so much money on roads for so long. I think I get asked to talk in public debates about this, and I think why I'm asked is perhaps I just bring data. I don't really deal with hearsay or you know, whataboutery. I just bring the facts and use. I think the more you can use the facts to dispel those rumors, the better. And I think it's absolutely terrifying what's happening in the UK. And what Hannah's actually talking about is a 50-minute city, and it's been used as a conspiracy that the UN are trying to lock us all up. It's terrifying. Sorry.
Thanks, Brian. Philip.
I just want to back up Brian in many ways about data and creating an evidence base and surveys. And a good example of a European city that I visited was Leipzig. Leipzig has excellent public transport because during communism, you had to wait 30 years to get a car. So they have the world's biggest tram network, and a lot of people cycle. But one of the things that in Leipzig they've been doing, and it's moving a little bit away from transport, but they had a lot of post-communism. They had a lot of deprivation in many ways, really serious economic problems, and a lot of people were leaving the city, and they had to collect the data to work out what their priorities were. And every 5 years, for every neighborhood in the city, they collect the data again, and to monitor how well are they improving. And they pick out the places that aren't improving very well. They look at the reasons why, and they prioritize actions to address those. So if we're looking at a neighborhood and we're talking about like the walkable neighborhood, if you haven't got the services that you need, it's not working. So they've picked out that if they haven't got the local swimming pool or the facilities that people can actually walk to, and that you don't need to get a bus, or you don't need to get in a car, that's really addressing the issues that need to be dealt with. So when we look at our own place here, this is what we need to be gathering as much as anything. I actually think Dún Laoghaire is in quite a good situation, but then I live in the centre of Dún Laoghaire, and I wonder about some of the more peripheral areas and the accessibility that they have. And I've tried to go to Loughlinstown swimming pool in the past before I owned a car, and I found it impossible. Or it took forever. Loughlinstown swimming pool is good, but it needs something to make it more easily accessible, and that then starts to create a more inclusive society. It makes things more accessible for people. So my example would be look at Leipzig.
Léan.
Yeah, I guess the key thing is to focus on people. And you know, in terms of the sort of language around motorists that we're seeing in the UK, there's a complete lack of recognition that motorists are not just motorists, they're walkers and cyclists and pedestrians, and, you know, even so most people wear multiple hats. It's not just that you're a motorist. I mean, even I'm a learner motorist. So, you know, people are not just one thing. And so I think steering away from that kind of divisive language and looking to, user-centered design, looking to human-centered design. The example that we had earlier about the trains, that could be avoided with, by if there was a commitment to actually looking at, how people use places and making it as easy as possible for them to do so across the whole range and diverse range of the population. And as you know, we are an aging population, and so like most parts of Europe, we're just doing it a bit slower than everyone else. But there are going to be a greater number of people who aren't driving, whether they're children or older people, or the 20% of women in Dublin who don't drive. So we do have to, so there's a demographic imperative that we do design for everyone, not just the motorist. And I think in terms of solutions, just to finish, I think the role of tactical urbanism and the role of sort of short-term pilots and experiments is a really interesting and successful way to co-create and to do things in a way that give people a say. So I think, and there's some brilliant examples of that in Dún Laoghaire, the pedestrianisation of Georgia Street. And I think what being one example, and then obviously the cycling route. But I think the pedestrianisation of Georgia Street was brilliant because it was done and then it finished, even though I thought it was great and I would have, it's going to come back in some shape. But the fact that it actually finished and then, all that data collection was done and so on gives people confidence and starts to build trust that, that the council and others will do what they say. And it is just a test and a trial. So I think there are different things that we can try.
Thanks, Léan. Aisling, you wanted to add to it?
Yeah, just very briefly, I was also going to mention this idea of building the pilots, that kind of short-term trials that can show people how different things can work. So like Dún Laoghaire, like Capel Street, which now has obviously become permanently pedestrianised, I think they're a really important tool in changing people's perception. Another thing that I suppose we all need to do, but is possibly something that comes back to what the national government or our government could be doing, is around information. So I'm sure people have heard this in this room, but people saying, I pay motor tax, therefore I have like an entitlement to the roads. Cyclists don't pay motor tax, therefore they don't. I have heard that comment at least 50 times. And I think it's a very frustrating misconception that people think by paying motor tax, they are therefore, part owners or have a right to the road network. And I think trying to change that narrative and make sure people are educated around, what your road tax actually goes towards, how it's determined, it's on carbon emissions, therefore it's to do with the impact you're having on climate change and not, contributing towards 1 kilometre of road. So I think there's a lot that can be done around informing people, having a more open debate, and also trying to avoid pitting people against each other. It isn't motorists against cyclists. It's not one or the other. It's making space for everyone.
Thanks, Aisling. Back to you, Hannah. Yep.
There was a question about a good city with good public transport. I lived in Latvia for 2 years and I liked being in Riga because every 5 minutes there was a trolley bus in different directions, and I could use any of these. They were using green energy and they switched from being a bus into trolley bus if there was no line overhead. And also there was a wide range of local trains like DART. So people actually used them to go to any places they needed, and each station was clean and nice, and some stations were switched into local civic centers or art areas, and people enjoyed going there. And even the smallest station was equipped with a toilet, and it is really very essential. Many times I saw in Dún Laoghaire's DART station people with small children searching for a toilet, and they saw a sign over the lift. They pressed the button and people were just going out from the lift, and they were shocked because they didn't know where to run with small children who needed to use toilet, and just that's not a big deal, but that definitely is something that can be done. And also, it is a huge problem, on my opinion, here that DART stations are very, very dirty, especially in the city center, like Dara and the other one, Tara station, and other one. Only Houston has like necessary equipment. So on my opinion, Riga is a very good example, because even I want to draw your attention to that point. When the weather was very bad, snowy and windy, local council encouraged drivers to take free ticket, to leave their cars at home and to use public transport to avoid congestions and accidents. So I think it is a very, very good practice.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you.
Gentleman at the back.
So, yeah, sorry I didn't say my name earlier because the baby was distracting me. Thank you for bearing with that. My name's Brendan. So I always find it funny because I'm a ratepayer and not a motorist at the moment. But when I had 2 boys, I wanted to go to the swimming pool. Suddenly, you apply for your learner's permit because it's an hour and a half from the house to Meadowbrook, an hour and 20 minutes to Monkstown, and an hour and a half to Loughlinstown. So we found one that's right by our house, but it costs the money that I had been saving up to buy a car. So that's sorted, but it shouldn't have to. And it was just interesting to see the moment when caregivers give up on the bike and give up on walking and give up on having like a very negative experience on a bus where, you know, a young man in sports gear and a massive bag refuses to move out of the buggy seat for a woman who doesn't have English as her first language. And you end up hitting a point of friction where you drive and then you join your neighbors who all have 2 cars outside their house and think we're insane for having none. But yeah, it's interesting to see how common that is. That's all I wanted to say. But sorry, cities. We never looked at Latin America. We never looked at Caracas. We also never looked at the US. LA is a great city to look at, particularly like when I was talking to urban planners in Ireland, and I say, why are you not looking at LA? They scoff and they laugh because they see the stereotype of LA as literally LA was, if you could describe the dystopia the cars cause, it was LA, and people actually get it there. And so there are solutions that are interesting that are kind of post-car in the same way as we're post-truth in the information side of things.
Thanks, Brendan. And again, I'll play devil's advocate here. And what is often said to me is look, we love the independence of our car. We like the status of having a car. Yet transport policy for the last 50 years on the car. So where do you see transport policy in 50 years' time, say?
I was asked that question recently about where I saw it, and one of the things I said I didn't see that cars would be in city centres in 50 years' time. That we would have grown up, and the cars would have been pushed out of city centres. I think transport policy over the past 50 years has been predominantly, how to get people around quick, and that's when you look at traffic modelling or transport modelling, it's around getting people to the place in the quickest way possible. And that's why the car always wins, and that's why the car always has the investment. I think there needs to be a mind shift in that, and there's been a couple of things recently that have just flabbergasted me. That the main one was when we spent 1.34 million to Arup to produce a rail review for the country, and the Taoiseach said this was a great excuse to start to build more roads and to keep building more roads, and it floored me. I think that type of thinking we need to get away from as rapidly as possible, because it's not just our generation. And like when I talk to students that are a generation below me, and they're kind of, you know, and telling them they're going out into the world as civil engineers and what they're going to do and what they're going to fix. It's all the problems that we created are the ones that they're going to fix, and baking in this car ownership is the biggest one.
Thanks, Brian. Philip, you want to add?
Yeah, I think 50 years, I can't imagine 50 years. It's too long. I'd like to imagine in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think really to deliver it, I was very much taken by Brian's point that we have 60 years of infrastructure to catch up on. And it sounds such a challenge that we can't deal with it. If we've got 5 to 10 years, we have to think small, we have to think local, and we have to deal with what we can do practically on the ground with what we have. And I think this is where local authorities can play a big role. And it goes back to the idea of the neighbourhood and how do neighbourhoods work. And if we're working at the local level and just implementing small measures to enable people to move differently without having to go to the car first, that in itself, Dunleary did this for each kind of for different neighbourhoods around the county, and they had a strategy to do that. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, it would be completely transformative.
Okay. Thanks, Léan.
50 years is a long time. I thought we'd all have jetpacks when I was a child. By this stage, you know, personal transport would have been solved. But I guess, I guess that there has been a huge shift and a change in the last 5 years towards sustainable mobility and away from the car. I think it still has a way to go, as Brian, you know, some of our public representatives are maybe not all the way there. And I think that's so I think it's really important that we all, if this is something that we care about, make that known to our public representatives so that they don't see this sort of one-dimensional idea of the motorist versus everyone else, that it is a multidimensional thing, and that we do you know, make sure that our public representatives don't let us down in the way that perhaps, well, we won't get into it, but it don't let us, that, you know, that we are on a footing towards a more sustainable transport policy going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Léan. Lady here. This is my last round of questions now because time is not on our side, and so we'll finish up with this round of questions. Lady, and
sure, it won't be too long. So Gráinne McNamara, I'm also from Codima. So I just wanted to ask if you think there's any way we could improve public consultation at a really early stage. So particularly I'm thinking with businesses in mobility projects where they've, you know, really reasonable concerns that they're going to lose out on business if a street is pedestrianised, reduce parking. How do we show to them that that's not necessarily the case, that will work with them, make sure there's places for them to get deliveries, that people with mobility issues will have parking, they're not going to suddenly not be coming to their shop. And I just cycled through Blackrock on my way here, and I know most of those businesses are probably doing much better than they have been doing this time a few years ago. So how do we kind of alleviate those concerns and address any reasonable concerns at a really early stage before we get the articles that make it sound like the council is trying to put them out of business and the clickbait starts?
Thanks very much. Now, anybody else? Last final questions now, gentlemen over here.
Hi, Alan Murphy, Smart Dublin, working with the 4 Dublin councils. A lot of focus here on expecting the government and public bodies to do different things, and of course there's a big focus on them, and rightly so. I just wonder, do the panel have a view on, you know, large employers, your universities, you know, what can they do to nudge their staff to choose a more sustainable mode of getting to work and moving around during the day?
Thank you. And the final question from anybody? Final question, gentleman over here.
My name's Justin Quirolo. I'm a resident here in Dunleary. And I guess my question is also related on, I think there's been a lot of talk about like having the 15-minute neighborhood, and, you know, I think that works great here as a resident here, but I do know that a lot of people recently, but the housing prices have been pushed out to border counties. Some people commute now 2 to 3 hours, to get into Dublin now. With housing affordability, is there a way to work with more on the housing side to support sustainable travel? So,
okay. Lady here, did you want to ask?
I guess my question is really short, but just why is it so hard for Dublin and for Ireland as a whole to implement a lot of these solutions? I think we've heard a lot of frustrated emotions that I think everyone in this room shares. I think we've heard a lot of interesting solutions. We know the cities and the states that are doing these things in other places, whether it's Los Angeles or Zurich or anywhere else that's been mentioned today. Why is it so hard? What's the big obstacle that's stopping all of this?
Thank you. Okay, who's going to, Brian?
First of all, on the businesses thing, Alan, I agree. I think that businesses and councils should do more. I work in a campus that 99% of people get there not by car, and the 1% that do get there, there's accessibility issues and those kind of things. So my campus is very close to loads of other campuses in Dublin city centre where you don't get the same type of mode share. The question about the housing, the 50-minute city and all the rest, nobody should be travelling more than an hour. That's great, but we have a housing crisis as well, and that kind of the two have the solutions for both housing and transport can fix each other, and we need better and more joined up thinking on that. And then the question, I think, links both of them there about the consultation, and I'm going to defer to my colleague Robbie Egan on this, but he did some great research here in DLR, and one of the key ways in which I think you can, from his work, was that you kind of empowered the planners with the kind of, almost like a cheat sheet of the questions that are going to come in, because a lot of the fear that's brought up around big transport projects is mainly around whataboutery, and if you have the facts to say air quality, traffic, noise, these are the main things, that if planners are empowered with that, then it can kind of cut through some of that kind of toxic narrative that tends to happen. And I'm not sure if Robbie wants to add anything more to that.
Yeah, I could just add a little bit more. I suppose one of the things we found often in public opposition to more ambitious active travel schemes that often involve road space reallocation, which does relatively disadvantage driving in certain cases, and at the same time make it easier to engage in active travel, was that often transport planning discourses were brought up in opposition. Ones that were about traffic diversion, that were around traffic in a kind of definition that excluded cycling and pedestrian traffic. And I suppose one of the other big aspects of it was a kind of demand-led approach to transport planning. That the purpose of transport planning is about meeting mobility demand, in particular for traffic. And when you don't include cycling or pedestrian traffic in that, all it does is reproduce planning for the car. So some of the, I suppose, solutions that we had to this or ideas around it, it's really good to see that there are more kind of language and discourses around places for people, around placemaking, around livability, around the human scale, which are really important. And then I think when you think about people who are kind of commuting longer distances as well, sometimes that can be semi-problematized, not always. But there also needs to be a transport planning discourse that includes walking and cycling as transport, and not just as something that is around placemaking. So part of what our thinking with that is about using the language of cycle traffic as well. So when you implement a new cycling scheme, it's not going to divert traffic; it actually converts traffic into a different mode of moving around. So part of that is really important because of a lot of the opposition, as I said, is around this kind of discourse around traffic. And then secondly, another important aspect of it is that we need to start thinking about cycle spaces as spaces for getting people around. And obviously the human scale, as I said, the people focus, it's important to change the function of how we think about planning, but transport planning discourse is here to stay as well. So we need to have an equivalent one that incorporates cycling and walking as traffic as well.
Thanks, Robbie. Aisling.
Just going to come back on the question that Alan posed there about what big companies and universities can do. And I suppose, I think there are a range of things they can do, but there's part carrot part stick. So looking at, you know, for example, I think this week the University of Limerick launched a new scheme where you can rent bikes from the university per term for €30. Amazing. That's brilliant. As you know, you need to have as many of those as possible. Our e-bikes are on campus in ATU and Sligo. They've made a lot of space available for virtual parking bays, connecting people into a town. That's brilliant. So making services available, giving people options, but then on the other side of it, also reducing the amount of available parking, potentially charging for parking where maybe you didn't before. These are not popular things. So I suppose you have to have built the other options, the infrastructure, to be able to then roll out those less popular options. Just even an example, I think the Department of Transport reduced its parking for staff there last year and brought in a scheme where you have to book it in advance. You only get a certain amount of days per week or per month. Those kind of things make sense when you're based on Leeson Street, a lot harder to do when you are in a more remote location. So getting that balance right. But you're right, everyone needs to play their part, and businesses and campuses have a role to play.
Thanks, Aisling. Finally, Léan.
Yeah, just to pick up on a couple of things, just on the public consultation, I think early engagement, as you mentioned, is really important. I think co-design is really important. So being able to building in co-design into the solution so that you can test things and, you know, really understanding the needs of people. I think experimenting and testing is important. So using kind of tactical urbanism or using tests of real tests, time-limited tests. I remember talking to a woman about the cycling scheme and she was telling me how much she loved it. And then she told me how she'd been really against it and then until she started using it. So people change their minds. So I think that's really important. And then just to come to the question of why is it so hard? So we work with cities all around the world. It's hard everywhere. Everywhere it's hard. The difference is they started earlier. The successful places started a long time ago, and now they're in a place that they're successful. You look at Copenhagen, which is an exemplar. 50 years ago, they began on their journey. So if you look at pictures, you'll see lots of car parking and different things. So I think, you know, and so to be optimistic, I think that we are on a journey here. I think it's going to be different. It's already different to what it was even 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. So I think we're on a journey. We need to accelerate. We need to do things more quickly. But I think this is really positive. You know, the amount of people who are here today and the shift in mindset. And I think we will get there. So thank you.
Thanks, Léan. Following that, I will now draw the session to a conclusion. I want to thank each and every one of you for giving your time this evening. The questions and comments were most interesting. I want to especially thank our panel, Brian, Aisling, Léan and Philip, for making themselves available to come and talk to us and to share their thoughts and their experiences with us. It was all very interesting, I must say, and no doubt the conversations will continue into the future. I just finally want to encourage you to attend the other open house Dublin events, including tomorrow, our own here in County Hall, How to be Energy Smart at Home. That's taking place tomorrow. So thank you all for coming again, and I wish you the very best and a safe journey home to you. Thank you.